Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And today I want to talk about popcorn. I have a lot of stories from traveling, and a whole chunk of them are from China. And I want to tell a story about my roommates, Matthew and Doris. My roommates, I usually lived by myself. I enjoy living by myself. It's easier. The cost of living is so crazy cheap in China that it was very easy for me to afford my own apartment in the city, even in the middle of the city, which is where my school was located. So I decided to try, instead of living on the outskirts, like I usually like. I like living out in the country, sort of. And by country, I mean suburbs. I thought it would be fun to just spend a few months, maybe 6 months or a year, depending on how much I liked it, living inside the center of the city. Because there were a lot of shops that I liked, and I don't know, the subway system, it just seemed interesting to me to live inside in the very middle of like the biggest city on earth. Sounded interesting. It was not easy to find a place, and I'll go over that story in another episode. But I did get a place eventually in a really nice neighborhood. There were all the shops I liked around it, all the food I liked around it, a really cool park, and my roommates were a nurse, Doris, and her husband, Matthew. Chinese people all chose an English name, especially if they interacted with non-Chinese people regularly. Doris was a nurse and worked in a hospital, and then Matthew worked in some international company. The defining characteristic of my relationship with this couple that I roomed with for, I believe, 6 months in total, roughly, was their incredulity at how anybody could not do the things they, as Chinese people growing up in China, surrounded and immersed in Chinese culture, did. Like everyone they knew, like everyone who had taught them, and like everyone they had grown up with. This is very common, I found, in a lot of countries, but especially in China, which has an extremely low immigration rate. There are very, very few, by percentage, immigrants, non-Chinese immigrants living in China. So when you grow up and everybody says candy, everyone around you means the same thing when they say candy. In China, they mean this little chewable milk, like soft chewable milk candy. That's candy in China. If you're in the States, you say candy, you might mean chocolate or a baklava or figs. And generally, in America, it's understood that different cultures think of different things as candy. But in China, the culture is it's such a monoculture that they are really surprised by anything that is not inherently Chinese. And of course, there are regional differences. What's the best sandwich in Sichuan versus Jiamusi, whatever. But in a monoculture, the differences between provinces are so much smaller than they would be in other more diverse countries. As a result, Doris and Matthew liked to regularly walk down the hall dining room to my bedroom to inquire things about Americans, which they always and forever assumed I could speak for the entire race of. And no, I didn't really misspeak. In China, race, culture, and country are very heavily intertwined and somewhat interchangeable, much more so than many other countries, and especially the incredibly diverse United States. Which, from context, I could understand Americans were not people who live in the United States. To Matthew and Doris, Americans were an entire race of tall, rich white people who shot guns at things all the time, drank whiskey every day, rode horses, had hardcore polyamorous sex, and did cocaine and heroin off each other's genitals. Obviously, they nailed it. No. So as someone with so many diverse and niche hobbies and interests, they had constant questions for me whenever I did something that didn't fit into something they had grown up with or a stereotypical portrayal of an American, in quotes. They lived in their bedroom on one side of the apartment, and I lived on the other side of the apartment, and between my room and theirs was a small hallway with a bedroom, a bathroom next door to their bedroom, a kitchen across the hallway from the bathroom, and then a sort of living room, but there was no couch or anything, just a room, and then a huge plate glass window that looked directly into my bedroom. It took up about half of the dividing wall between my room and the living room area, and my room doorway was kitty corner with the front door. So if you walked in, you would be standing next to the plate glass window looking into my room. I, of course, put a curtain against the wall facing into the dining room, since half of the wall was glass and I needed privacy for changing clothes and growing magic mushrooms. Neither of the Chinese people understood this need for privacy, and either Matthew would ask me questions or Dina would tell him what questions to ask, and then he would come over and ask me questions. So sometime during the first few days, I got a knock on my door and opened it, and Matthew came inside to ask me about the curtain on behalf of his wife. Now, I did record these conversations because I thought they were some of the funniest things that I had ever heard. I wrote them down at the time and still have that original document. So these sentences, I'm going to read to you all of the dialogue. This is almost word for word the conversations that I had with my roommates. Now, both Matthew and Doris had made it very clear that they wanted me to speak English so that they could practice their English while I was living with them, and I agreed to that. So most of this was in English, and then whenever we did have to translate a word or I had to speak Mandarin so that they better understood me, or when they're speaking Mandarin to each other in these stories, I'm just going to translate all of the dialogue to English for convenience's sake. Okay, so Matthew has entered my bedroom now and is standing next to the desk, and has told me that he and Doris are confused about why I had a curtain. So Matthew says, Doris was asking why you have the cloth? Oh, just, if I need privacy, it's there. Matthew crosses his arms, nods at me, chuckles, and says, like changing clothes, or maybe your girlfriend comes here. Yeah, something like that. General privacy. Matthew leans around me and takes down the curtain from the hooks that I have put it on. It's fine. We won't look. That's very strange. No curtain. No curtain. I gently take the curtain out of his hands. Thanks. I get it, but I'm going to leave it up. Matthew rolls back on his heels, nods slowly at me, crosses his arms again, shakes his head. Okay, if you want. But we won't look. But if you want it. Matthew spins around on his heels and retreated back to his bedroom, where as soon as he opens and closes the door, as soon as the door closes, him and his wife begin loudly conversing back and forth about my weird privacy policy. Literally like, why does he have it? He wants privacy. What? Why? And that goes on for 20 minutes. Maybe it was because I kept my cocaine-laced orgies out of sight, but I received constant questions from the happy couple as to why I wasn't as tall, as gun-toting, or as irresponsible as all the Americans they knew from TV. Now, Matthew worked in an international company, but in China, it was mostly Chinese people, and although there were people in the building who were not Chinese, he didn't talk to them. So I was nearly the first non-Chinese person to exchange a few words with either of them, and I was absolutely, because Matthew let me know this, the first non-Chinese person that either of them had had any sort of conversation with. This made everyday moments, for me, a revelation for them. And in Matthew's class, a very perplexing set of behaviors. Like showering at night. So I walked to the bathroom, opened the door. Matthew immediately opens his door, which is very close to the bathroom door, and says, "What are you doing?" I'm standing in a towel, holding the door to the bathroom open. I'm going to take a shower. Do you know it's the evening now? Yeah. Matthew just stares at me. Thank you, I say. Matthew crosses his arms, shakes his head. Okay, well, I'm gonna shower. Matthew interrupts me. Americans don't shower in the evening? He points at me. You shower in the morning. Matthew then raised his eyebrow and tilted his head toward me like he was a detective that had caught me in a red-handed lie. So I said, well, it's different according to how busy you are or who you are. It just depends on a bunch of factors. Matthew leaned back again. His wife, from behind the closed bedroom door, shouts loud enough for our neighbors to hear. What's he saying about the shower? So Matthew turns back to the closed door and shouts back, in Mandarin. He says different Americans take showers at different times. His wife, from the other side of the door. Why? Matthew turns back to me. Why? That was fun for a long time. It eventually ended and I got to take a shower. But anything they hadn't seen in a TV show where all the Americans did it, they were very confused why I would do it. I sort of felt like I was living inside this TV show, and it was usually just fun for me to answer their questions. Like, a towel? Why? To get dry from the water. Huh. Sometimes it got irritating when I would be working on a schedule or lesson plan. Maybe I'd be writing an email to someone while in the room by myself. And often during the first few weeks, I'd be sitting at my desk in front of my bed when Matthew would knock on the door. And he'd, hello? Through the door. And I would say something like, hey there, what's up? And Matthew would open the door a bit that I didn't lock. Are you busy? Me trying to avoid the inevitable. Yeah, I'm working on my lesson plan. Ah, good. Okay. Matthew would open the door wide, sit down on my bed behind me without asking, and stare at me. Did you need anything? Oh, no. Just finished work. Got home. Need to shower. Oh, okay. Well, I've got to keep working on this schedule for the school, so... Yes, yeah. Schedule. So, I'm gonna... And then I began to type, thinking I can just finish the paper, leave for dinner, make him exit my room, lock the door, and never leave my door unlocked ever again while at home. Matthew said, Wow, I won't bother you, please, you work. I am typing furiously now. Okay, I'm just finishing up. Do Americans like ice cream? Yeah, some Americans do like ice cream. Huh. The visits became less frequent as I kept my door locked most of the time following that incident. And I was only occasionally trapped in similar situations. It seemed like they were if they had a pressing question, they knew that my door was locked after a week or something of trying. And I would answer through the door, oh yes, I am busy. And that would mean that I wasn't going to unlock the door for them. So it seemed like they were hiding behind their door. And if they had a question, when I left my room, they would jump out and ask me the question. The time it takes to explain that Americans like ice cream, Chinese food, sneakers, pans, and many other sundry items was gargantuan, an exhausting amount of time. Popcorn, yeah, it took me 14 minutes to get here, was a whole other adventure. I like popcorn with butter and salt. It is delicious. I love to get hot air poppers from thrift stores whenever I move to a new place. I found a hot air popper on Taobao, which is like the Chinese eBay, and I was super happy to discover that it actually worked. I couldn't believe it. Like, there was no weird plastic smell, nothing blew up, it just made popcorn properly. It was easiest to plug the machine in on my desk and make the popcorn in there, because my roommates were kitchen marauders, and there was very rarely a spot on the counter in the kitchen or the living room without broken eggshells, dripping oil, orange peels, meat just hanging out. So there really wasn't room for a popcorn bowl or the popcorn machine outside of my bedroom desk most of the time. The first time I started up the hot air popper, which, if you are unfamiliar, generates hot air in a vortex, all the seeds get hot and then they pop. So you can make popcorn without any oil, but it's a little bit louder because there's whirring air in a vortex in the middle of the machine. It's not super loud, but it's not quiet. And the first time I made it, I could hear the couple down the hall behind closed doors begin to gently ask questions to each other in the foghorn bellow that is common to Chinese people. And speaking Mandarin, it's a lot easier to get the tonal variations across if you're speaking very loudly. That's my understanding of why Mandarin is spoken so loudly. So I could hear them asking questions. What is it? I don't know. Do you want to check? No. And going on in that fashion until I turned the machine off because the popcorn was done after a few minutes. And then I got to listen to them talk about, what just happened? It's off now. What was it? I don't know. Was it loud? It was loud. Is it off? No, it is off now. The second time I made popcorn, I turned on the machine and instantly way more questions flew between each other in the other room, which is across the apartment down the hall, but they speak loudly. I can hear them. Chinese languages are high volume, high octane affairs. The other bedroom door opened and Matthew walked out into the dining room. He casually stood in the middle of the room, examined the ceiling, the side of the refrigerator, and the bathroom door, in between shooting glances toward my open door. He couldn't see the popcorn machine because the desk was not, right where the door is. It was along the wall behind the curtained window. He didn't ask. I didn't offer information. He turned around and went back in his room. The third round began the same. The hot air began swirling noisily in its vortex. There was a loud conversation behind closed doors, ending with the wife shouting, "Go, go!" And the door opened up. Matthew repeated his inspections of various items in the dining room, but this time with super nonchalance. He surprisingly found himself standing in the doorway to my room, next to me, standing next to the hot air popper, watching it heat up those popcorn kernels. So he leaned forward, crossed his arms, and he was ready. What's, this? This is a popcorn machine. Popcorn? Like the microwave? Yeah, but I prefer this kind. He picked up my container of unpopped popcorn kernels, just in a clear plastic jar, and stared at them skeptically. This is not corn. It is. That's just what it looks like when there's very little water left inside the kernel. It's just about ready to be popped. Matthew was shaking his head while I was saying this. So he looked up at me under his brow, like real suspicious like. He was like, really? Uh-huh. His wife is shouting from the other room. And rather than go back to talk to her, he just begins yelling back to her in Mandarin. So now this conversation is between her and him through their bedroom door. Doris isn't coming out, and he's not going to walk back there. They're just going to shout across the apartment at each other. What's he doing? Making popcorn. With what? A machine. Come look. Come look. Doris practically explodes out of the room and was inside my room within a second. After the sonic boom from her mad dash to my bedroom had quieted down and we could all only hear the popcorn machine again, Doris tried to ask me a question. How does... Pop! She screamed. The first kernel had popped and Doris was alarmed. Is that normal? Matthew. What happened? What? There's a very small amount of water still in these kernels, like a really small amount. Then I waited because Doris had stopped listening to me, had become fascinated with the container of kernels, picked it up, looked at it, studied it a while, and then sniffed them. and she turned to Matthew and said, "Matthew, this is not corn." Matthew laughed and shook his head. "Of course it is corn, Doris. You see, this is what corn looks like without water." So I jumped back in. When that very small amount of water boils because of the heat, the kernel will pop. And then you have popcorn. While these explanations were happening, the kernels were still popping, and Doris was staring at me as though I had cast some sort of magic spell over the kernels to get them to pop. And then as more kernels kept popping, because it increases at a very quick rate, Doris stopped listening to either of us. Matthew was still explaining the process of heat to her. And Doris just stared down into the machine, transfixed, and then into the bowl as the kernels rushed out in a storm, a flurry, and again, just completely transfixed until the machine stopped. When there was maybe 1 minute left, roughly, I told them, "Okay, it's time to melt the butter now." Doris just kept staring fixedly into the bowl, and Matthew, nodded with his arms crossed and brow furrowed. Yes, the butter. I walked the 10 feet to the fridge, cut out a square of butter, put in the little metal measuring cup, clicked on that dial for the stove. At the snap of that gas starter, Matthew shouted, Wait! And unnecessarily ran from my room the 10 steps over to the stove where I was. Doris stayed where she was, staring into the metal popcorn bowl. So Matthew's behind me now, sort of using me as a human shield from the stovetop and the butter, and he leans forward into my shoulder, craning his neck to look sort of over my shoulder and around my head down at the butter on the stove, which is completely unnecessary because he could have just stood right next to me. "What are you doing?" "Melting the butter for the popcorn." "What's the yellow thing?" "That's the butter." "What's butter?" And I translate it, "Huangyou." Matthew quickly jumps back, crosses his arms, and raises his eyebrow at me again. "On popcorn? That is not how you make popcorn. You don't put that on popcorn." Yeah, it is. I know that in China, everybody is used to sweet popcorn, but trust me, this tastes better. Matthew said, and while that was a good point, I continued melting the butter and swirling it around in the little metal cup I had. And after it melted evenly, I picked up the bag of salt that I had in the kitchen and carried them over to my room. Doris was still staring into the bowl, just not moving, watching the last few kernels fluff out and roll into the bowl. Doris saw the butter, and her eyes bugged out like a cartoon. She had a quick Q&A with her husband. They rapid-fired Mandarin back and forth, who very confidently explained that Americans put butter on their popcorn because Americans like salt and Americans hate sugar. I wasn't going to get into that and just didn't correct him. So I slowly poured the butter in a thin stream over the pile of popcorn in a circle around. Doris covered her mouth in shock, but was clearly smiling behind her hands, as if she had just witnessed a child being delivered into the arms of its mother. She took out her camera and began recording the pouring of the butter. It was a pretty satisfying experience, to be honest. Then I shook the bowl with years of experience, because I don't, shake it around, I sort of flip it so half of the popcorn pops out of the bowl a little bit and then falls on top of the popcorn, the bottom falls on top of the top, and that way you can just put on the butter and the salt and then, flip it a few times and everything mixes in real good. Their jaws dropped, like I had just transmuted water into wine. So the butter is now evenly distributed after a few flips of the popcorn, the bottom to the top and all that. So I sprinkled the sea salt that I had onto the popcorn, at which point they leaned in and just watched my motions as though they were safety practices at a nuclear reactor facility. Doris immediately started recording again once I started sprinkling salt, and Matthew pulled out his camera to match hers. And since I knew they liked seeing me flip the popcorn onto itself the first time, I started explaining how I could get the bottom of the popcorn to the top and mix everything in. Really easily this way with just a few flips of the bowl, a few bumps of the bowl. And without warning, Matthew shot both of his arms out and grabbed two sides of the bowl that I was already holding and just began shaking and jostling the bowl in rapid jerks. Just in all directions. He commanded his wife to take pictures, she took a bunch, we posed for the camera, and then he let go of the bowl. So I mixed it a couple more times real quick, and then held out the bowl for them to try some. They both looked from the bowl, then up to me, then back down at the bowl, then slightly turned away, in distrust. Not that they thought it was dangerous, it was just new, and they were like, what's going on here? This is a different flavor. And the following conversation happened. Go ahead, it's delicious. Matthew. I don't like salty popcorn. Oh, have you had it before? No, but I like sweet popcorn. And then he shot out a hand, grabbed a large handful, and just thrust it in his mouth, all of it at the same time, and chomped up and down as though he were trying to kill a swarm of bugs in his mouth. He swallowed, raised an eyebrow, crossed his arms, and nodded. It is good. Turns to Doris. It is good. I ask, Doris, do you want to try some? Okay, but I don't like it. I like sweet popcorn. So she's been basically just staring at the bowl the whole time like a student, and she gingerly picks up one kernel and puts it in her mouth, and then she puts her hand over her mouth and turns away so we won't watch her as she chews. She turns back after she finishes and she says, It is good. I don't like it. It tastes strange. Do you want more? She immediately picks up a bunch more in her hand, a small handful, and chews them, thoughtfully. I don't like it. It's really good, though. It tastes good. But I don't like it. Okay, I like it. It's good, right? That is good. Do you want a bowl of it? No. Thank you. No, I don't want any. But neither Doris or Matthew have stopped eating the popcorn. While she's going through her whole thing, Matthew is just eating fistful by fistful of popcorn. And neither of them leave the room, after Doris says multiple times that she doesn't want any, while continuously picking up new handfuls of popcorn and eating it. Okay, I'm gonna get you a bowl, I said, and, I walk out to the kitchen. Matthew, no, don't worry about it. He's still eating handfuls of popcorn. And Dina also is eating popcorn while saying, oh, I don't want one, it's fine. So I came back with a bowl and gave them out most of the rest of the popcorn because they had already eaten half of it. And they took the bowl that I gave them and both of them scurried back to their room in a rush, like dwarves huddling over gemstones they had just extracted from the mine. And they ate half of it before they even got to their door 20 feet away. It was very funny. And it was super cool to share this very American and personal experience with people who had never had popcorn before like this. Following that introduction, I gave them bowls of popcorn very often. Whenever I made it and they were around, coincidentally, they showed up outside of their room fairly often when I happened to be making popcorn, and I would give them some. But air poppers, they're the best. It's super easy to make huge bowls, so yeah, I'd always give them some and I'd just make more. Living with them wasn't always funny. They had their issues, which I might get into in another podcast. And I do like living by myself, so I only lasted 6 months, 4.5 months, something there. But that was one of the funniest things that has ever happened to me in China. And I'm very happy to introduce you to Matthew and Doris. Thank you so much for listening. These stories are so much fun to share. You can talk to me at bitofarambler@gmail.com or all the socials, and I'll get back to you on the next one.